Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our lower ball joint. To do that, you're going to have to safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground and the suspension is hanging. That's easily done by jacking up from the frame. After that, you're going to want to continue on by removing the wheel. If you have a center cover, pop that out of the way. Give it a quick inspection, set that aside. Underneath that, you're going to find 5 19mm lug nuts. Remove all of them and then the wheel. Now that we have the wheel off, I want to talk to you about something. To gain access to be able to remove our lower ball joint, we're actually going to have to take this entire unit right out of the way. To get this out, we're going to continue with the outer tie rod end. Typically, you're going to find a cotter pin. Go ahead and take that out, remove it. It's a good idea to replace it in the end. And then we'll remove the mounting nut. To remove the nut, we'll use a 21mm socket. Go ahead and give that nut a quick inspection. Make sure it's still reusable. Assuming it looks good, set it aside. Now let's continue on with a hammer. We need to try to separate the outer tie rod end from the knuckle. Typically, this can fairly easily be done with a little bit of vibration. I'll just use the hammer, bonk on the knuckle here a little bit until it finally breaks free. Inspect the tie rod, make sure you didn't damage the boot or the threads. This looks fine. We'll go ahead and set it aside and move along. Now we can go ahead and turn the knuckle so we can gain access to our 2 15mm headed mounting bolts that hold the caliper to the knuckle. You'll find one down low and one up a little higher. Let's start removing the pair. Now as I remove the first one, the first thing I do is take a peek at the threads. I want to make sure it's not rotted or damaged in any way. Assuming it looks good, we'll just take it and put it back in a couple threads. Now with that in there, as a safety bolt, let's continue on to removing our last bolt up here. Now we can grab onto that caliper, we'll fully remove our other bolt. Gently pull the caliper off of your brake rotor. Now once you have it off of there, it's important to make sure you hang it in some way that it's putting no pressure on the flex hose. You can't just leave it swinging like this because you could potentially damage it. Now the next thing we want to do is come over here to where the ABS wire makes its way underneath the front bumper cover. We're going to feel around. There's a little squeeze tab. Squeeze on that tab and gently pull this down. Once you have it down, inspect both sides of the connector. Make sure you don't see any funny colors. If you do, it's probably corrosion and that would need to be dealt with. Now we'll follow the ABS wire to each of its mounting points. We're going to have to separate it from the frame and then tie it around the knuckle so we can continue. I'll just use a pick. You can either use an angled pick or a flat one. Let's go ahead and pop this free. Carefully pull the wire out of there. Generally, I just like to give it a quick inspection as I go. This looks okay. I'll move along. Now, like I said, I'm just going to go ahead and tie this onto the knuckle in a way that it's not going to get broken, damaged, or caught on anything. Now let's move to the lower ball joint. We're going to go ahead and remove the cotter pin and loosen this nut. Let's use a 1-inch socket to remove this nut. Go ahead and take that nut and put it on there just a couple threads. Now let's move to the upper ball joint. Now it's time to start separating the upper ball joint from the knuckle. To do that, you're going to find that you have a pinch bolt that goes through from the rear of the knuckle all the way through to the front. You're going to have to go ahead and use a 15 millimeter to remove the nut and a 13 millimeter to hold the bolt. We'll use a hammer and punch to remove the rest of this bolt here. Now the next thing you want to do is start separating this. This can fairly easily be done by using a hammer. Sometimes what people might do, if they were replacing the ball joint up here at the same time, you could just go ahead and use a pickle fork, get it in there, and it'll separate it for you. When you do it, it's going to damage the boot. So just keep that in mind. If you're not replacing the ball joint or the boot, be extremely careful not to damage it. The next thing I like to do is take a bungee cord or a strap of some sort. I'm going to go ahead and come right inside one of the ears of the knuckle, and then I'm going to take the knuckle and essentially put it up into the straight up and down position, or at least as close as possible. Then we can continue on with a hammer and a pickle fork. Let's take our pickle fork and hammer, and we're going to carefully get in between the control arm and the knuckle. We want to make sure the pickle fork goes around the ball joint stud, which goes from here all the way down and through. If the regular hammer wasn't working for you and you have access to an air hammer, go ahead and use that. Now we can go ahead and remove our safety strap from the area. Now it's time for some heavy lifting. We'll go ahead and take this. We're going to gently lift it up and remove our nut. After that, tilt it a little bit and slide it down and away from your ball joint. Now we're going to continue on with some snap ring pliers. Looking at these, you can tell they have two little ears. You want to make sure that they fit into the corresponding ears on the snap ring on the top of your ball joint. Once you have them in there, go ahead and squeeze it and remove the snap ring. Keep in mind, it is under spring pressure and you don't want it to fly off and potentially hurt you. On top of your ball joint, typically you're going to find a grease fitting of some sort. If you have one, go ahead and get it out of the way. Let's grab it with some pliers, turn it counterclockwise, and remove it. Now let's continue on with our ball joint tool. To be able to get this out of here, you're going to want a cup that fits over the bottom side of the ball joint and hits directly against the control arm, but does not touch the ball joint. Now we'll just go ahead and take the ball joint tool with the hole, and we'll go ahead and put it over the hole where the stud's supposed to go. Continue on by putting the driver against the ball joint. Now we'll continue on with the proper size socket for your particular tool. We'll go ahead and start driving this down. As we do, you're going to find that the ball joint presses down and through the control arm. Make sure you're holding your tool. There it is, friends. Now that you have the ball joint out of the control arm, it's a good idea to clean down the control arm and then inspect the area where your brand new ball joint's going to go. Make sure it doesn't look broken or damaged or worn in any way. To install this, you want to make sure you have a cup that can go on the bottom. It has to have a hole for the stud to go through, but it also needs to fit up against the base of the ball joint. You don't want it any smaller to the point that it's going to pinch the boot, but you also don't want it larger to the point that it's not going to be able to press it up and into the control arm. We'll go ahead and sneak this into position. Now you're going to want a second cup up along the top, something that fits over the control arm but still allows the ball joint to come up and through. And then we'll just have a cup on top of that, which we can put the rest of our ball joint tool onto. Once you have your tool set up, we're going to start pressing the ball joint up and into the lower control arm. So, with that said, you want to pay attention along the bottom of the ball joint here. That base of the ball joint needs to press all the way up against the control arm. You don't want to leave it separated a little bit. So once we bottom it out, we're just going to ensure that we drive it in all the way. Now, as you can tell, after I drove it all the way up there, I gave it a little bit extra. I want to make sure that it's nice and tight. But I'm not going to stop here. I'm going to continue with my hammer and cause some vibration. Double check the ball joint and make sure it's sitting perfectly flush. If it isn't, continue driving it in. This one looks perfect, so I'll remove my tool. Double check it. Now it's time to install our brand new locking snap ring. I have it on my tool, but before I put it on, I want to talk to you about the ball joint. Up along the top area here, you're going to find a groove in the ball joint. That's exactly where the snap ring needs to go. You need to go ahead and put it on there and then ensure that it's sitting all the way around. Now I'm just going to feel all the way around, making sure that it doesn't seem like it's peened up in any way. If this isn't sitting on there properly, it could come flying off. What could happen next? The ball joint could potentially come out of the control arm. It's unlikely, but it's important to make sure you're as safe as possible. All right, let's go ahead and grab our knuckle and we'll slide it onto the lower ball joint. After you have it slid on there, continue on with your ball joint nut. Let's go ahead and bottom out this nut. The next thing you want to do is grab your upper ball joint pinch bolt. Go ahead and clean it down. Give it a good inspection, and then get ready for installation. Once you have the ball joint into place, go ahead and put in your pinch bolt. Apply some red thread locker. Start your mounting nut on there and snug it up. Let's torque the upper ball joint pinch bolt nut to 41 foot-pounds. Now move along to your lower ball joint nut. We're going to torque this to 98 foot-pounds. The next thing you want to do is have a look at the ball joint nut in comparison to the ball joint stud. On the stud itself, you're going to find a hole going through it, and on the nut, there's several slots. You need to make sure one of those slots lines up with the hole. If it doesn't, continue tightening until the very next slot does. Go ahead and take a brand new cotter pin and slide it right on through. Peen it over so there's no way this nut can loosen up on its own. Now it's time to reinstall our caliper onto the rotor. Go ahead and turn it into a position that you can slide the caliper over the rotor. Once you have that on there, continue on with your 2 mounting bolts. It's a good idea to use a little bit of red thread locker on these. We'll start in each of them, snug them up, and then we're going to torque them to 83 foot-pounds. Let's make our way over to the tie rod. We're going to slide that right into the knuckle. We'll start that mounting nut on there, bottom it out, and torque this to 63 foot-pounds. For the tie rod, you know exactly what I'm about to say. On the stud, there's a hole. The nut, several slots. Line them up, put in your cotter pin. Now it's time to resecure our ABS wire. We're going to take this and we'll bring it up and then down. We want this wire facing down as it goes into the first one. Now this one's going to scoop upward. We'll make our way across the top of the frame. Now we're going to reconnect in the ABS wire. Listen for a click, give it a nice tug, make sure it's secure. Okay, at this point you just want to double check everything. Assuming everything's torqued and secured, continue on by putting on your wheel. Once you have it up on there, go ahead and start on all of your 19mm lug nuts, bottom them out. We'll safely get the wheel back on the ground and then we'll torque each of these to 100 foot-pounds. Now, once you have it torqued, assuming you have a center cover, go ahead and put that on now. Looking at the inside of the center cover, you're going to find that you have a protruding area. That area needs to go into one of the lug holes. Make sure it's completely secured. Okay, friends, we've got our ball joint installed in the vehicle. At this point, it makes sense to go ahead and take it for a road test. Make sure you don't hear any funny noises, and then get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.